On a dark and stormy night in April 1957, Argentine Colonel Carlos and several masked soldiers stealthily entered a memorial hall. Due to the tense domestic situation, the site was only guarded by an elderly watchman, who was fast asleep. The 5 men pried open the heavy door and headed straight for a coffin inside. Using ropes, they secured both ends of the coffin and brazenly carried it out. Their accomplices quickly loaded the coffin onto a large truck that had been standing by. In no time, they whisked it away to a secret military base. The next day, news of the stolen coffin caused an uproar among the Argentine people. Furious crowds gathered and marched towards the presidential palace, demanding the return of the coffin and nearly inciting a rebellion. Why was this coffin so important to the Argentines? It contained the remains of Evita, the beloved wife of Juan Perón, revered as a saint by the Argentines. Many had heard the song "Don't Cry for Me Argentina," often called Argentina's second national anthem. This song was written about Evita, who, despite being born an illegitimate child, rose from the slums to become the nation's mother, revered like the Virgin Mary. Hollywood spent 17 years deciding which actress would portray this legendary figure. What kind of charm did this woman possess? What did she do to be worshipped as a deity by the Argentines? Maria Eva Duarte, known as Evita or Little Eva in Spanish, was born into poverty on May 7, 1919, in the rural village of Los Toldos. Seeking a better life, she moved to Buenos Aires to pursue an acting career. Her mother, Juana, faced many hardships. Orphaned at a young age, Juana's siblings disappeared when they left to find work, leaving her uncertain if they were even alive. Juana became involved with a local landowner named Duarte, who treated her merely as a mistress. After having 6 children with him, Duarte abandoned her, leaving Juana to raise the children alone, a daunting challenge. Juana used her savings to buy a sewing machine to make trousers, but even working from dawn to dusk, it wasn't enough to support her family. Consequently, Evita endured scorn and mockery throughout her childhood. She was bullied at school, and neighbors looked down on her. Despite her unremarkable grades, she had a talent for writing and public speaking. Juana, always supportive, encouraged her children not to let poverty hold them back, pushing them to stay in school with the hope that one day they could change their fate. On January 2, 1935, at just 15, Evita left her family and took a train to Buenos Aires alone. Upon arrival, she quickly realized that the city, despite its size, had no place for someone as poor as she was. Finding work was nearly impossible. This was during a time when Argentina's GDP was second only to the US and the UK, and Buenos Aires was a popular destination for wealthy European immigrants. Nevertheless, for Evita, making her way was anything but easy. Despite its natural abundance, Argentina's wealth was more a stroke of luck than a result of human effort. There's a popular joke about Argentina: after creating the earth, God realized that Argentina had been blessed with all the riches, vast grasslands, rich oil reserves, majestic mountains, and enchanting landscapes. To balance things out, he placed Argentinians there. Argentina had the potential to become a developed nation simply by exporting beef and mutton to the world. However, most of the land ended up being controlled by a few landowners who were content with being the world's granary and showed no interest in industrialization. By the 1940s, even the second largest city, Córdoba, was still largely grassland. As a result, while Argentina's per capita GDP appeared high, it masked a deeply unequal society. Evita had little formal education and no particular skills. Aside from her plain appearance, she had nothing to her name. As a newcomer to Buenos Aires, she faced harsh treatment from society for an entire year. She started off singing and dancing in nightclubs but couldn't tolerate the constant harassment from customers. Dreaming of becoming a movie star, she turned to the theater and film industry, only to find it was no different from the nightclubs. She tried to make a living off her looks and body, but everyone she encountered assumed that was all she had to offer. She had to rely on various male companions just to land bit parts with no lines, often dying early in the film. Most of the time, she had to borrow her landlord's stove to cook and scavenge discarded fruit from the market. Evita's life left her increasingly disillusioned, as everyone she met was just as greedy and hypocritical as the elites she had known before. Even after becoming a minor celebrity, she never forgot these experiences. During this time, Argentina was caught between two major influences, Nazi Germany and mainstream American society. People were either pro-American or pro-Nazi. However, Evita loved to criticize both countries, insisting that Argentina could only have a future if it expelled all American influences. As an actress, Evita's performances were mediocre at best. But having risen from the bottom, her criticisms of the Argentine government were piercingly accurate. She quickly befriended some members of the Democratic Party, who took her to the slums to witness the dire conditions in which the poor lived. These scenes deeply moved her. After much contemplation, Evita decided to abandon her acting career and applied for a job at a radio station. Although the initial pay was much lower than acting, Evita believed that broadcasting could genuinely change people's minds and influence public opinion. Surprisingly, she took to broadcasting like a fish to water. Her voice was compelling, and she quickly became a nationwide sensation. However, the country was on the brink of significant change. In 1929, the global economic depression struck, and Argentina, with its underdeveloped industrial sector, saw its economy collapse rapidly. Farmers went bankrupt en masse, unemployment rates soared, and economic issues quickly turned into political unrest. Argentine military officers, notorious for their reckless and unplanned actions, deposed presidents almost as quickly as they themselves met their own downfalls. In September 1930, army officers armed themselves and forced the president to resign. To avoid bloodshed, the president swiftly surrendered. However, the military government soon fell under the control of oligarchs, prompting the officers to overthrow President Castillo. Yet, they had no plan for what to do next after his removal. They established a provisional government but couldn't even agree on a president. It's no wonder there's a joke in Argentina. A mother had 3 children and wanted each to find happiness. She nurtured the eldest to become a judge because he was a genius, had the second manage the family business because he was good with finances, and had the third join the military because he was good at following orders. Amidst this cycle of governments rising and falling, one officer gradually rose to power and became a key figure. This man was Juan Domingo Perón. Perón was born into a middle-class family and entered military school at 15. After graduation, he furthered his studies in Italy. During his time in Europe, he witnessed various political movements, from mass uprisings against governments to Mussolini's widespread popularity. Comparing these experiences with the situation back home, Perón had an epiphany. Argentina had seen 5 civilian leaders flee in disgrace, 4 military dictators die prematurely, and a total of 6 short-lived regimes. Reflecting on these leaders, iron-fisted strongmen, elite aristocrats, or self-important figures, he realized their downfall had also led to the country's ruin. How could a developed nation like Argentina end up in such a state? It was both perplexing and disheartening. Initially, Perón thought Argentina's biggest problem was Irigoyen. When Irigoyen was ousted, Perón thought the issue was Castillo. After Castillo was overthrown, Ramirez became the new problem. Once Ramirez was removed, Farrell became the latest issue. Perón now understood that Argentina's main problem wasn't external. He believed the previous regimes were short-lived because they failed to mobilize the people's power, becoming detached from the masses. Whenever the domestic economy faced turbulence, the government would crumble. To mobilize the masses, Perón decided to take inspiration from Mussolini. He famously declared, "I will do what Mussolini did, but without repeating his mistakes." After the coup, Perón took on the role of Secretary of Labor and Social Welfare. Many people considered this position insignificant and not even part of the cabinet, but Perón saw it differently. Perón believed that by controlling the unions, he could win the support of Argentine workers, a goal he valued more than a short-lived cabinet position. As expected, he quickly gained significant influence, holding military power in one hand and organizing labor movements with the other. He secured wage increases for workers and improved their conditions, leading them to see him as their representative. During this time, Argentina was experiencing rapid governmental changes. During this period, Evita hosted a radio program that sharply criticized Argentine politics. Her insightful satire quickly made her a champion for the working class, advocating for their rights. On January 15, 1944, an earthquake struck Argentina. At a benefit concert organized by the local radio association to raise funds for the victims, Perón and Evita met. Sharing similar values, they immediately connected and quickly fell in love. Evita soon became Perón's secret weapon in his political campaign. She used every opportunity on her radio show to praise Perón, portraying him as the protector of the working class. Perón's rise was unstoppable, and he soon became vice president. He began to implement his ideas, which later became known as Peronism. In 1944, just 4 days after the Allied landings in Normandy, Perón gave a speech stating that it didn't matter whether the Allies or the Axis won the war, what mattered for Argentina was achieving freedom and prosperity. He believed both capitalism and communism were outdated, proposing justicialism as a third position to balance the interests of capitalists and workers. This idea of balancing labor and capital, as well as maintaining neutrality between the US and the Soviet Union, led many to say that Peronism was trying to have it both ways. While this might seem outrageous today, many Latin American leaders at the time shared similar views. After World War II, decolonization made independence inevitable. Having been colonized for so long, their social systems and economic structures were shaped by their colonizers, often resembling capitalism but still dominated by feudal-era landowners. With a lack of a substantial working class and little experience in proletarian revolution, many believed that national independence and liberation could only be achieved by first establishing a social democracy. In simpler terms, it was a matter of not now, but definitely in the future. Perón's moderate reformist stance resonated with many of Argentina's lower classes and national capitalists. The strategy was to first establish a socially democratic and anti-imperialist state where different classes could cooperate and develop independently for a period of time. Once the working class had grown strong enough, they would then move on to achieve socialism. In other words, it was a case of not today, but definitely tomorrow. The Argentine Communist Party lacked sufficient grassroots support. Normally, Perón's attempt to straddle both sides would have led to attacks from all fronts, making his regime unsustainable. The pro-American capitalists in Argentina certainly considered removing Perón from power. On October 9, 1945, while Perón and Evita were having dinner at home, the military stormed in, arresting Perón and imprisoning him on Martín García Island in a naval prison. If nothing unexpected had happened, Perón would likely have met the same fate as his predecessors. However, from the moment Perón was taken, Evita calmly assessed the situation. The military had staged a coup and taken control of the radio stations, but Evita still held the power of the unions and could rely on the workers' strength to turn the tide. She hurriedly went from factory to factory, speaking to the workers. She told them that the man who had been fighting for their wage increases just days ago was now imprisoned. The enemies hated Perón's policies and despised them as well. She urged them to fight for their rightful claims, saying, "Fighting for Perón is fighting for yourselves." Within just a few days, on October 17, workers from the outskirts of Buenos Aires swarmed into the city, chanting slogans demanding Perón's release. Some radicals even smashed government building windows, threatening to thrash all of Perón's opponents. All factories in Buenos Aires halted operations, transportation ceased, and the power was out. Faced with the uprising, the military officers were both cowardly and brainless. They didn't even dare to deploy troops to suppress the revolt. They sent negotiators to talk to the crowd, who bluntly told them to either release Perón or face civil war. The officers quickly caved because they knew that even within the military, they were not united. The coup against Perón collapsed in less than a week. When Perón and Evita walked hand in hand onto the balcony of the Casa Rosada, the crowd roared until they were hoarse. This was a rare instance in Latin American politics where a coup was reversed. The next day, Perón proposed to Evita. Eva Perón became the First Lady in 1946, when Juan Perón was elected President of Argentina. Upon assuming office, Perón's first move was to nationalize the Argentine Central Bank, which had been managed by foreign bankers. He then invested heavily to reclaim the telephone network from the British and the railway system from the Americans. These actions might have seemed like a shift towards communism, but that was not the case. Regarding land reform, Perón's government reclaimed and redistributed 450,000 hectares of land to 3,200 families over 4 years. However, with over 1 million landless farmers in Argentina, this effort was barely a drop in the bucket. In truth, Perón had no intention of dismantling the large estate system. Despite his rise to power, control of Argentina remained firmly in the hands of the oligarchs. The government merely pressured them to make financial concessions to workers to maintain a facade of change. At the same time, Perón curtailed press freedom, taking control of the media and suppressing leftist ideologies. For example, a member of the Argentine Communist Party named Fernando was imprisoned for 7 months for communist agitation. This person had a friend named Ernesto Guevara, who was studying medicine at the time and would later become the iconic Che Guevara. On the international stage, Perón faced significant pressure. During the Cold War, finding a middle path between capitalism and socialism was risky. Leaders like Nehru in India and Nasser in Egypt had attempted this and failed. By all accounts, Perón's regime should have been short-lived, but Eva Perón played a crucial role in its endurance. Together, they established the Eva Perón Foundation, using funds from the wealthy and political opponents to provide welfare to workers, aid orphans, and improve public welfare. Eva frequently visited the grassroots, listening to laborers' grievances and giving speeches. As First Lady, her constant presence among the people earned her deep affection. Thus, Perón's regime continued in a unique manner. Since he didn't challenge oligarchic control, the U.S. didn't see the need to overthrow him as they did with Allende. However, because the economic structure remained unchanged, Argentina's industrial weaknesses were never fully resolved. The economy's health still depended on global conditions. The turning point for Perón's regime came with Eva's declining health. In 1951, she was diagnosed with uterine cancer, and despite Perón's efforts to get the best medical care, her condition worsened. In her final moments, Evita's thoughts were still consumed by Perón. Evita published her autobiography, My Mission in Life, which largely praised her husband. She feared it wouldn't pass censorship and it was rejected by American publishers. In retaliation, the magazine was banned from Argentina for several months. During the May Day celebration in 1952, Evita delivered her final words to over 300,000 workers in Plaza de Mayo. This poignant moment was immortalized in the movie Evita, where Madonna, playing Evita, sings Don't Cry for Me Argentina from the balcony. Evita died in 1952 at the age of 33. Her funeral was held with presidential honors, attended by millions of mourners. Union members each donated a day's wages to build statues in her memory across the nation. The turnout was overwhelming. Over 2,000 people were injured in the crush, and countless others tried to kiss her coffin. The government had to deploy the military to maintain order. Evita's death marked a significant turning point for Perón's regime. Perón couldn't trust anyone else to lead the 6 million workers, having seen their power firsthand. With the country's gold reserves nearly depleted due to high welfare policies, he needed new revenue sources. Though Evita had opposed U.S. interference, 6 months after her death, Perón began to lean towards the U.S. In January 1955, he allowed American companies to export freely to Argentina. By June 1955, the Navy launched a coup, and Perón narrowly escaped thanks to a U.S. warning. On September 16, 1955, a Catholic nationalist group within the Army and Navy launched a coup that ended Perón's second term. Perón fled Argentina during this military coup. The regime believed Evita's embalmed remains needed to be removed for safety. Although she was a controversial political figure, many Argentinians revered her as a saint, and millions attended her funeral. The military regime that toppled Perón in 1955 secretly buried her body in Milan, Italy, fearing her grave would become a symbol of opposition to the dictatorship. Numerous folk tales surround the theft of Evita's coffin. One night, an officer named Geraldine, who was guarding the coffin, inexplicably shot his wife and then, overcome with grief, took his own life. Another guard, a female soldier, reportedly saw something that drove her mad, prompting the government to cover Evita's coffin with a red cloth. Despite Perón's exile, the competence of Argentine officers remained questionable. The government that followed Perón repeated the same mistakes. Within just over a decade, there were 6 military coups, and out of 18 years, 11 were under military dictatorship. The Argentine people grew increasingly discontented because these governments were even worse than Perón's. Each new administration seemed to outdo the last in incompetence, leading Argentines to declare, "You are the worst administration we've ever had." Under Perón, while the economy might not have been stellar, at least the workers had political standing. However, the post-Perón governments failed both economically and politically, discriminating against the working class. The more Argentines reflected on it, the more frustrated they became. By 1972, Argentina's average GDP growth rate was the 3rd lowest in Latin America, with an inflation rate of 80%. While many consider the Peróns to be populists, Argentines could distinguish who genuinely cared for them. Frequent disappointments forced them to settle for the least bad option. In 1973, after 18 years in exile, Perón returned from Spain and was re-elected as president, but he died of illness just a year later. Even years after their deaths, the Peróns remain enduring symbols for Argentines. Every July 26, many Argentines march with images of Evita to commemorate her. The name Perón still holds unparalleled influence in Argentina. The Peróns gave Argentines a vision of a better life, though it was merely an illusion. The path to prosperity for Argentina remains for future generations to explore, building on the legacy left by the Peróns. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel.